This hearing is called to order. Good afternoon and welcome. I apologize for the delay at the start of the hearing. We had a vote scheduled at 2:30, and so that delayed our beginning this hearing, but welcome. I want to thank each of the witnesses for coming and testifying. Exploration. The need to seek out the unknown, to expand our civilization, and to create new enterprise. Nearly 400 years ago, some of our nation's first pioneers, the Pilgrims, set out across the white-tipped Atlantic Ocean in search of the New World. William Bradford, speaking in 1630 of the founding of the Plymouth Bay Colony, said that all great and honorable actions are accompanied by great difficulties, and both must be enterprised and overcome with answerable courage. It is that same answerable courage and restless desire to seek out the unknown that led our country to expand westward, to create new industries, and eventually to look towards the heavens to chart out a new course for American discovery and free enterprise. With names like Armstrong, Aldrin, Shepard, and Lovell, we set off through the vistas of space and inspired a nation. However, this journey hasn't always been easy and has come at great cost as we remembered fallen heroes like Grissom, Husband, and McCullough. Today, we pay our respects to the achievements and lessons of history, but we also seek out a hopeful future that has its roots in our nation's frontier history and the promise of new discovery. We have come together in this committee room to reassert American leadership in space. My priority for this subcommittee is to ensure that the United States remains the leader in space exploration in the 21st century. We began last year by committing our nation to fostering the continued development of strong commercial space sector through the passage and enactment of the U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act. Now we look to build on that foundation by focusing NASA's energies on continuing to make progress in exploring space and redoubling its partnerships with the private sector. Human space exploration and innovation are integral to the mission of NASA. That's why this subcommittee will work to provide NASA with the security and stability that is necessary as the agency transitions from one administration to the next. And I look forward to working with Ranking Member Peters throughout this process. We have unfortunately seen what can happen to NASA and the spirit of its employees when worthy missions and programs are clouded in uncertainty and cancellations. Cancellations to programs such as Constellation, which sought to return astronauts to the moon and beyond, or the retirement of the shuttle program, have had lasting consequences that NASA and the broader space community are still grappling with today. These cancellations have left our country completely dependent on the Russians to get American astronauts to and from low Earth orbit at a cost of $82 million per seat. If we can keep NASA on its current path, it is likely that the Commercial Crew program will finally launch American astronauts from U.S. soil by the end of 2017. Additionally, as we set our sights on a journey to Mars, it is imperative that we continue to build the Space Launch System and Orion, which will take NASA into deep space and lead us to new discoveries. Our path forward is not easy, but it is necessary for the future of our American space program. We must continue to expand the domain of free enterprise deeper into space, to do it first and to lead the world, and to ensure that we don't squander the opportunity before us today. With that, I'll recognize Senator Peters for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. And I want to thank Chairman Cruz for calling this hearing today. I'm very pleased to be here to discuss the future of NASA, and I want to thank each of our distinguished panelists in advance for your testimony here today and your willingness to answer our questions on this very important topic. You know, being from Michigan, the epicenter of the automotive world, I can't help to notice but some very striking similarities between human space exploration and the automotive industry. The auto industry enjoyed a long period of growth and prosperity during the 1990s and early 2000s, and then in 2007, what has been called the Great Recession occurred, And at the same time, the price of gasoline skyrocketed. That led to factories being shut down and thousands of employees being out of work. And the outlook for the American auto industry at that time was, as you recall, particularly grim. But Detroit automakers responded by doing what Americans do best. They endured, they innovated, and they rose to the challenge. With the U.S. auto sales now reaching a new high in 2015 and expected to be even higher this year, the U.S. automotive industry is emerging as a great American comeback story. Similarly, we've seen highs and lows in the space business. We've had a hiatus in human spaceflight after the end of the very triumphant Apollo program. We had amazing successes with the iconic Space Shuttle program, but we also, unfortunately, endured the Challenger and Columbia tragedies. We've constructed a football-sized space station and maintained a continuous human presence in space for over 15 years. But following the retirement of the Space Shuttle and challenges and false starts in fielding the successor program, our human spaceflight program hit a low similar to what the auto industry hit in 2007. But now, just like the American auto industry, human spaceflight is making a comeback, and it's making a comeback in a very big way. NASA and American industry are working together with a common goal of leading to more efficient, safer, and more capable systems. We must continue to innovate, find new efficiencies, meet new deadlines, and maintain the highest standards of excellence. These are the same elements that help bring the automotive industry back to where it is today, and I believe that these elements will continue to bring the U.S. human space exploration to a new high. Pushing out to the frontier of space certainly inspires the next generation of engineers and scientists, creates technologies and scientific advances that make life better here on Earth and helps power the dynamo of American industry. The SLS and Orion programs alone engage thousands of suppliers and small businesses all across this great country. I've spent time with several of these suppliers in Michigan, including Futuramic, a company that has transitioned from the auto industry to the space industry. Investments in space don't only help us understand the universe, they create jobs and drive innovation in Michigan and communities all across the nation. A great deal of progress has been made since NASA authorization of 2010, and with the first commercial crew flights to ISS, the first launch of the massive SLS rocket, and the launch of the massive James Webb Space Telescope, all planned for the next 2 years, there are some huge milestones just around the corner. Just about anyone who was alive at the time vividly remembers, as I do, watching the Apollo missions on TV. Achieving Kennedy's goal of putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade is certainly one of the most significant technological achievements in human history. Since we last left the moon nearly 45 years ago, we are now on the cusp of journeying once again into deep space. And we are not just going to cautiously dip our toes in the water and then pull back. We're going to go boldly, and we're going to go there to stay. I look forward to working with my colleagues to reauthorize NASA and provide the agency with the stability and consistency of purpose that is needed to achieve the ambitious goals that we have set for our space program. And this hearing is an important step in that direction. And once again, I'd like to thank our witnesses for your testimony and for your leadership on this important journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Nelson, would you care to make a brief opening?
Thanks, and I want to thank you, Senator Cruz, for calling the hearing. We're going to Mars, and we're going with human beings, and it's going to be in the decade of the 2030s, and we're starting to do the things that we need to do and develop the technologies and systems in order to support life, to get there, to stay there, and to return. All of this goes back to when my colleague from Texas, Kay Bailey Hutchinson, and I had the opportunity of bringing in, corralling, bringing in for a landing, the new direction of NASA in the 2010 NASA authorization. Recently, I visited Stennis and Michoud, and I saw that they're getting ready to test that new core that is being built as we speak in Michoud. We have Orion being put together at the Kennedy Space Center. Mind you, what they are putting together is the second, because we've already put an Orion together and sent it out about 3,600 miles for a ballistic reentry. So we're going to Mars, and the rockets and the engines and the spacecraft that are the building blocks of that mission are now being assembled and getting ready to test. And you can imagine what the day is going to be like in 2 years, only 2 years, when the largest, most powerful rocket ever, the Space Launch System, rolls out of the vehicle assembly building and then lights off into that first full-up test. And so we are on our way. Now, all of that is being complemented by the fact that late next year, we're going to start flying American rockets with American astronauts on them to and from the space station, just like we have been flying the cargo on American rockets. And so this committee, which has always worked in a bipartisan manner, and is committed to continuing tradition that we work together as we advance and pass another NASA reauthorization. So thank all of you witnesses for being here. Your testimony is exceptionally important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. I will now recognize, introduce the witnesses on the panel. We have Mr. William Gerstenmaier, who is the Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations at NASA. A graduate of Purdue University and the University of Toledo, Mr. Gerstenmaier began his career at NASA in 1977 and has been integral in the strategic direction for all aspects of NASA's human exploration of space and cross-agency space support functions of space communications and space launch vehicles. He provides programmatic direction for the operation and utilization of the International Space Station, development of the Space Launch System and Orion spacecraft, and is providing strategic guidance and direction for the commercial crew and cargo programs that will provide logistics and crew transportation to the space station. Our next witness is Dr. Lynne Dittmar, who is the Executive Director for the Coalition for Deep Space Exploration. Dr. Dittmar has spent her career specializing in strategy, business development, stakeholder engagement, and space policy and planning, working with defense, aerospace, research, and technology firms. Dr. Dittmar previously worked for the Boeing Company, where she oversaw new technology development, managed the flight operations and space flight training integration groups for International Space Station assembly flights, and served as chief scientist and senior manager for commercial payloads. Mr. Mark Sirangelo is the corporate vice president of the Space Systems Group for the Sierra Nevada Corporation and is a longtime voice within the aerospace industry. Mr. Sirangelo has helped build and grow Sierra Nevada's product portfolio, including small satellites, space technologies that have enabled more than 450 planetary missions, such as the Mars Curiosity rover and New Horizons Pluto mission, rocket motors, including motors that won the Ansari X Prize, and perhaps most notably, he is responsible for developing the Dream Chaser spacecraft, which is the only reusable lifting body low Earth orbit vehicle capable of landing on commercial runways around the world. I would also note that Mr. Sirangelo served our country proudly with distinction as an officer in the United States Army. Professor Dan Dumbacher is a professor of engineering practice at Purdue University. A graduate of Purdue University and the University of Alabama, Professor Dumbacher spent 35 years with NASA prior to joining Purdue. While at NASA, Professor Dumbacher served as Deputy Associate Administrator in the Exploration Systems Development Division for Human Exploration and Operations Missions Director at NASA headquarters. In that capacity, he provided leadership and management as the Program Director for Exploration Systems Development, encompassing the Space Launch System, Orion, and Ground Systems Development and Operations Development, and integration efforts. Professor Dumbacher also served as the Director of the Engineering Directorate at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, which provided support to the Space Shuttle program as well as the Ares launch vehicles. During his career at NASA, Professor Dumbacher was awarded the coveted Silver Snoopy Award, NASA's Distinguished Service Medal, and the Presidential Rank for Meritorious Service. And I will now recognize Senator Daines to introduce Mr. Michael Gold, who's a former resident of the great state of Montana. Senator Daines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I get to formally welcome Mr. Gold here today. Mike Gold grew up in Montana, and I got to believe it was night times and night skies in Montana and seeing those stars that probably give you interest in space.
I felt like I was in space already, Senator.
Mike's originally from Poplar. He graduated from high school from Billings Senior High. So did my dad. Go Bronx. As a young lawyer, he took his Montana ingenuity and began his career representing commercial space clients in the early days before SpaceX. In 2008, Mike was appointed to the FAA's Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee, where he presently serves as the chair. Now, Mike is Vice President of Washington Operations and Business Development for Space Systems Loral, responsible for business development of emerging space technology. It's a pleasure to see a fellow Montanan be successful in the tech industry, and I look forward to his testimony. Welcome, Mr. Gold.
Thank you, sir, and it's been terrific working with you and your staff. You're making me homesick.
And with that, Mr. Gerstenmaier.
For allowing me to represent the men and women of NASA here at this hearing. The workforce at NASA and its support base is part of the most talented, dedicated, innovative workforce in the world. Moving human presence into the solar system is not an easy task. If you look at the robotic success rate at Mars and the number of spacecraft that were lost in that endeavor, it shows that this is not an easy task and is extremely difficult. Mars is really the right long-term destination, as the Martian environment has resources that can be directly used to support human presence without requiring all of the resources to be brought from the Earth. Today, almost 16 continuous years, crews have lived and worked on the International Space Station. Again, this is a difficult task, but in the Earth-reliant region, resupply is possible many times a year with cargo vehicles, and crew rescue can occur in a matter of hours. This region allows for development of long-duration space systems. The systems can be improved and repaired in low Earth orbit. This region is also important to the private sector. A meeting with the terrestrial-based companies is occurring today in San Diego this week, and there are 200 new companies that are associated with doing research in space at that event in San Diego. The purpose is really to expose of this event is to expose the private sector to low Earth orbit research, enabling research off the Earth for the benefit of the Earth. The next activity in human spaceflight will occur in the region between the Earth and lunar orbits called cislunar space, or the Proving Ground. And this is a great proving ground where crew rescue can take days and commercial companies can still assist in resupply. The Space Launch System and the Orion systems are designed to enable deep space travel, and the Proving Ground enables testing and verification of these systems for their ultimate role in moving human presence into the solar system. Operating into cislunar space enables significant lunar activities if desired. Moving human presence into deep space and breaking the ties with Earth requires three basic capabilities: transportation, staying healthy, and working in space. The current activities at NASA support these capabilities through a variety of projects and programs. The Space Launch System, Orion, the Asteroid Redirect Mission, electric propulsion, laser communication, the Next Step, deep space habitation development, the Human Research Program, Space Station, ground operations at Kennedy, and commercial crew. Future areas needing work with Mars will be Mars entry, descent, and landing, Mars ascent and return to Earth, and in situ resource generation on the surface of Mars. The agency is well positioned on this long-term mission or journey and is focused on executing the plan that we have laid out. We intend to continue earning the continued support of the administration and Congresses for this plan. The progress to date is nothing short of amazing. While a number of Government Accountability Office and Office of Inspector General findings have highlighted areas for concern, the good news is none of these findings are things that the programs were not already working on. They are the normal activities that occur as part of development. You know, spaceflight systems development is difficult and demanding, but we are overcoming the challenges. Around the U.S. and the world as we speak, real hardware is being fabricated and assembled, test facilities are being utilized, and people are working together to expand human presence into the solar system. Manufacturing and development of this magnitude involves a large variety of contractors, partners, and small businesses. There are substantive strides on this journey to Mars. NASA is positioned for a vibrant future, and we continue to lead the world in space through a balanced program of exploration, science, technology, and aeronautics research. We look forward to your continued support for these activities by working together and by not overly specifying requirements. If President Kennedy would have challenged NASA with the specific requirements commonly levied today, there would have been no lunar landing. President Kennedy did not specify the type of rocket or the orbit maneuver plan. He simply stated, send a man to the moon and return him safely to the Earth by the end of the decade. He simply stated the requirements that mattered to the administration and let the technical experts work out the details. The technical experts had the authority within these requirements to change the plan as needed to accomplish the goal. The technical experts started with a plan for a direct lunar landing without needing a risky rendezvous in lunar orbit. But this approach required a huge rocket development. The teams had the flexibility to change to a lunar orbit rendezvous that lowered the requirements for rocket development and allowed us to reach the moon. Specifying the right level of requirements and allowing for technical changes are critical to successful execution of the ultimate goal. Moving human presence into the solar system over the next several decades will take the best efforts of all involved. Your past support is appreciated, and your future support is absolutely needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gerstenmaier. Dr. Dittmar.
Chairman Cruz, Senator Peters, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss with you my thoughts on U.S. leadership in space exploration. I'd first like to say it's an honor to be asked to testify, both before you and as a member of this august panel. My own background is diverse, but in my current role, I serve as the Executive Director of the Coalition for Deep Space Exploration, which is the voice of America's industry working on a range of human exploration and science missions. With more than 50 members across the nation, we are proud to be a part of America's deep space programs, and we're grateful for the support of this committee and the Congress who sustain them. NASA stands at the cusp of a new era of exploration in deep space. For the first time in human history, we are poised to answer some of humanity's biggest questions. Where did we come from? Where are we going? Are we alone? Under NASA's leadership, an architecture is developing that will maximize the use of industry, international partners, scientists, operations experts, entrepreneurs, engineers, and program managers working in collaboration to answer the big questions and to generate a range of other returns to the nation. Despite challenges driven by budget disconnects between the administration and Congress, the programs underpinning this architecture have made tremendous progress over the last 7 years. Like you, Senator Nelson, I was recently at Michoud, where the Space Launch System and the Orion crewed spacecraft are being developed, and they will carry humans into deep space, and I was blown away. The last time I'd been around so much hardware was in the late 90s when I stood in a high bay at the Marshall Space Flight Center, which housed all at one time 5 modules prior to launch. At Michoud, there is a similar excitement palpable on the factory floor, only now it's focused outward toward Mars. We are going somewhere. In a real sense, NASA's job is to plan for what is ultimately an optimistic vision of the future. Negotiating and executing programs for space exploration and science over decades is even more challenging than the engineering and technology upon which they rest. As we enter the election season, we are keenly aware of the potential for change. Change can be good, but let me state unequivocally that it's the position of the coalition that major disruptions stemming from abrupt shifts in space policy risk derailing all of the progress that's been made and jeopardize our future as a nation. With regard to my membership, which is made up in large part by small companies, such rapid shifts result in shuttered offices, abandoned factory floors, and ruined firms. Yet, these same companies are the ones most likely to generate new inventions, drive most job creation in the United States, and exemplify the enterprising spirit that powers our economy and our nation. NASA's SLS and Orion programs alone have sustained hundreds of companies in this sector, enabling innovation, new technology, new production methods, and the achievement of entrepreneurial dreams. In return, these companies have provided critical components needed to lead the way back to deep space. Constancy of purpose is critical. In my written testimony, I detail the critical roles played by various components of NASA's architecture, beginning with the ISS as a hub of commercial development, and importantly, as an indispensable facility for the development and testing of deep space exploration systems. With regard to deep space systems, the long-awaited moment when our solar system is reopened to human exploration and development is approaching and will become real in a little more than 2 years with the first integrated flight of Orion and SLS. In 2021, NASA will return American astronauts to deep space. These initial flights will open up a new era as NASA and its industry and international partners begin assembling a true deep space infrastructure, leading to new possibilities in human exploration and science. Like the generations of explorers before us, we will learn as we go. Eventually, once we've developed sufficient skills and validated the systems, we'll push deeper into space to Mars. NASA's diverse portfolio represents consensus and compromise among many stakeholders that has been painstakingly developed on a bilateral, bicameral basis across 2005, 2008, and the 2010 NASA Authorization Acts. Looking back across a decade characterized by transition, progress, and opportunity, it is evident that this course has been a wise, measured, and effective one. In my written testimony, I offered some suggestions regarding essential elements I believe should be addressed for our continued progress. I wish to thank the Congress and this committee for your committee to SLS, the Orion crewed exploration spacecraft, ISS crew and cargo transportation, the James Webb Deep Space Telescope, the start of deep space habitat development, as well as ongoing operations of the ISS, and the recent triumphs of science missions such as New Horizons and Juno. I encourage you to review the Coalition's recent paper, A Space Exploration Roadmap for the Next Administration, which I respectfully submit for the record. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Dittmar. Mr. Gold.
I would like to thank you, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Peters, Commerce, Science, and Transportation Ranking Member Senator Nelson, members of the subcommittee, and the talented and hardworking staff of this subcommittee for this opportunity to further discuss the future of NASA. My name is Mike Gold, and I am the Vice President of Washington Operations and Business Development for Space Systems Loral, or SSL. SSL is America's most prolific commercial satellite manufacturer, a global leader in space-based robotics, and an innovator for spacecraft technologies such as solar electric propulsion. America's human spaceflight journey began with Alan Shepard's first foray into the final frontier. And while NASA has and will continue to push far beyond the historic flight of Friendship 7, the low Earth orbit environment, or LEO, has never been more important. Per the title of this hearing, NASA is indeed at a crossroads. The ISS is aging, and while NASA intends to maintain the station through 2024, the end of the ISS era, particularly in terms of the long lead times required by major aerospace projects, is nearly upon us. Although the ultimate path forward remains uncertain, it's clear that NASA will not build another government-sponsored LEO space station. Therefore, the future of LEO remains squarely on the shoulders of the private sector, which presents both an extraordinary challenge and an equally extraordinary opportunity. Thus far, LEO human spaceflight in general, and the ISS in particular, have been able to depend upon funding from governments to support operations. This will change substantially as LEOs transition from government to private sector auspices. And the greatest hurdle that America will face in maintaining a human presence in LEO is developing the robust private sector demand necessary to fund such space-based activities. A potential solution to this funding challenge can be found just above the ISS in geostationary orbit, or GEO. Hundreds of billions of dollars are pouring into GEO every year to support and purchase satellite services. NASA and the private sector should abide by the old Washington adage to follow the money. Specifically, manufacturing satellites in space could revolutionize the telecommunications industry. Freed from the constraints of rocket fairings and the launch environment, numerous large radio frequency reflectors could be affordably fabricated in space, leading to dramatic increases in radio frequency reflector sizes, which would substantially bolster satellite capabilities, increase satellite fleet resilience, and lower customer costs. The hundreds of billions of dollars spent on telecommunications could be the fuel for a new era in LEO human spaceflight. And SSL stands ready to unite these two endeavors, joining with NASA to demonstrate a vital new capability. This subcommittee's purview includes both space and competitiveness, and I can assure the subcommittee that the competition in the global marketplace, and particularly in the satellite sector, is fierce. The primitive days of building a satellite, launching it, and throwing away a piece of hardware worth hundreds of millions of dollars simply because it ran out of fuel is coming to an end. As I described at a House hearing just last month, we are now entering a new era of Satellite 2.0, wherein satellites are refueled and restored while still in orbit. The companies and countries which master satellite servicing will gain a critical economic and military advantage over international competition. DARPA already recognizes this fact and has initiated the robotic servicing of geosynchronous satellites, or RSGS program, to create new domestic satellite servicing capability for both defense and commercial satellites. NASA has its own satellite servicing program, Restore-L, which will service the Landsat 7 satellite. While both RSGS and Restore-L are worthy endeavors, much more needs to be done in this arena. Less than 2 weeks ago, China's National University of Defense Technology successfully refueled a satellite in orbit. America cannot afford to lose the satellite servicing race, and NASA has a critical role to play by using its power as a customer to execute contracts with domestic providers to service the agency's fleet of satellites. This would not only save NASA money, but would enhance the agency's capabilities, all while creating new private sector jobs. Again, NASA is indeed at a crossroads, and all of those roads lead towards more robust collaborations with the private sector. NASA must search out an intersection of public and private sector interests and leverage those points of intersection both to lessen its own financial burden and to bolster American competitiveness abroad. An example of this is the work being done via the Next Space Technologies for Exploration Partnerships Habitat Initiative. NASA needs a habitat to support beyond LEO exploration, and the private sector needs a habitat to support commercial activities in LEO. Both needs could be met by NASA and the private sector sharing the cost of development for a habitat, and subsequently launching it to the ISS to test a vital piece of NASA's Beyond LEO architecture while validating the business case for the commercial activities needed to sustain a private sector space station successor to the ISS. NASA and the private sector must move forward together, hand in hand, because, to quote the great entrepreneur and statesman Benjamin Franklin, we must all hang together, or most assuredly, we will all hang separately. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gold. Mr. Sirangelo.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Cruz and Senator Peters, for coordinating this, and to all the senators on the committee. This is a wonderful opportunity to talk about what we're going to be doing in the future, and it is exciting for all of us to be thinking about it. I also wanted to thank the staff for putting this together. It's not easy to bring this group of people together, and I'm honored to be here with these 4 distinguished members of our committee, of our community. For a long time, this industry has been growing, and I remember at the very beginning of what is now called the commercial space industry, there were less than 10 of us sitting around the table in a restaurant deciding what we wanted to do, and that eventually became known as something as called the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. And over the course of what has only been about 12 years, it's now grown into an industry that is worth billions of dollars and employs tens of thousands of people. It is something that is uniquely American and something that is amazing that we can do this in our industry and in our world. Sierra Nevada designs and manufactures all sorts of things for space, spacecraft, space vehicles, rocket motors, spacecraft systems, and components. We've been doing this for quite a long time now, almost 25 years, and have produced over 450 successful space missions, over 4,000 things that we've built for space. And that's a wonderful record. We've been recognized for it in many ways. But what it really says is that we know how hard it is to be in space. We know how hard it is to do what we're doing and how hard it is to be successful. Our diverse technologies are used in many areas: telemedicine, navigation, threat detection, security, commercial aviation, science, infrastructure, and protection in the United States. And currently we employ a workforce corporate-wide of about 3,000 people in 34 locations in 19 states. And that has come from a very, very small start. We were an entrepreneurial company. We know what that's like. We know how hard it is to build a company up. As the head of Sierra Nevada Space Systems, as well as a founder and chairman emeritus of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, I hope to share with you a little bit of our industry's insight and my perspective as you chart your course ahead. The current national space policy in the United States and the current NASA Authorization Act were both established in 2010, and that was a really pivotal year, I believe, for our space industry. Many of the things that we had talked about in principle began to turn into reality. Several foundational programs, such as the cargo resupply services effort, began to take hold. And that was really built on a bipartisan effort between Congress, the White House, and these enabling policies significantly advanced the strength and leadership of the United States, NASA, and other key department and agencies. And just as importantly for us, I think, is creating jobs and expanded our U.S. industrial base. The imperative is clear in this national space policy. The utilization of space has created new markets, helped save lives by warning us of natural disasters, expediting search and rescue operations, making recovery efforts faster and more effective, made agriculture and natural resource management more efficient and sustainable, and expanded our frontiers. It really has enabled so many different industries, and I think that's one thing that sometimes gets lost about space is how many industries space is involved with. More than anything, I think, though, our growing space program provides excitement for our young people. I'm sure every one of us can remember something about the space program that fascinated us. I know I did. One day I had that awe in my childhood that said someday I'm going to be involved in it. And the idea that someone like me, coming from a background that did not have space associated with it, could be in this room talking to you today is really what we are here to talk about. We can't forget as we do this, our young people and the inspiration that what you do and what we do in space provides to them. Out of the many things I think that can divide us, the one thing we can all agree upon in this room, I think in our country and indeed throughout the world, is that we want the future of our children to be better than our lives are today. We want to remember the wonder we had as being that child, of looking up in the stars, as you said, Senator, and seeing what the future would be, and thinking about it, and going there and flying there. And in my view, we never want to lose that inner child or the importance of it, because that's what exploration is based on. We want to feel something we don't feel today. As I like to say, dreams don't have an expiration date, and they do sometimes come true. And they certainly have for me, in part because of the work that you have done over the last 5 years in the last NASA Authorization Act. Our space program provides amazing technical achievement, but as equally as important, it provides hope for our next generation, enabling to do something remarkable, like perhaps building a new space company, becoming a respected leader at NASA, or even becoming a member of Congress who might go to space one day. These dreams are started in part through the thousands of internships and entry-level jobs that my company and those of my colleagues provide. These opportunities fuel the demand and drive for education and careers in science, technology, engineering, art, mathematics, something which I prefer to call STEAM instead of STEM. This in turn enables, I believe, our U.S. global leadership in technology and other key fields. Bold moves like our country's space program excite students and uplift all elements of society. Isaac Asimov, one of our country's famous space writers, once said, "If I was in heaven, I would do what I'm doing right now forever." And for me, space is not just a job, and for many of my industry, it's also human instinct, it's also art, and it's also passion. It's really important for us to look at this. In the last few years, the United States has imagined and defined the next phase of global commercial space environment, which is a market valued at now over $300 billion annually by our most recent Space Foundation report. This success has not gone unnoticed around the world. Lots of countries are coming after us. They're seeing what we're doing. They're seeing what we've been about, and they're also seeing the benefits that accrue to society from this. And today, because of these rapid advances, we have a position of leadership. We have a position of leadership in the world. We need to continue, however, our joint government, academia, and industry efforts if we want to further extend this bold path and continue this leadership in the future. Even though it's been 47 years since the moon landing, there's a reason why U.S. space leadership, the moon landings, our shuttle program, are still talked about in all around the world. And there's a reason why our landings on Mars and our flights to Pluto and the most recent flight to Jupiter are covered by every media in the world. As a personal connection, I believe that these enabling policies that we've had have supported us in creating groundbreaking agreements, such as the one that my company just signed with the United Nations to utilize Dream Chaser for global research. America is a world leader in this area, and it's critical to our country that we remain that way. Space achievements take fully years to realize, but the extraordinary is worth waiting for. A truly sustaining, self-sustaining, sustaining commercial market in low Earth orbit does not yet fully exist. I believe it can and will be led by the United States. Collaborative action by the Congress, by White House, by NASA, industry, and academia are needed to bring this to reality. At SNC in particular, we know the value of this collaboration. Our journey with Dream Chaser, which is the only reusable commercial lifting body in the world, has taken over a decade. It's lived the American dream of believing that the impossible is possible. 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, we looked at it and said, is it really possible for a company of our size, of a small size, to build the next space shuttle effectively working out of a garage in California? Many people laughed at us. Many people said it wasn't going to happen. You know, there's famously said, some look at the world and say why, and others look at the world and say why not. We looked at it and said why not, and believed with the help of our country that we could get there. Dream Chaser is now in test flight as a true multi-mission space utility vehicle that can safely execute new expanded missions. And it's NASA's strategic investments in our very successful public-private partnership that has really enabled this. It's the way that we're now thinking in this new world of commercial space. The confidence that NASA had brought forth and the investment that NASA had made has spurred us to make the same type of investment, a commercial investment worth hundreds of millions of dollars to create something new for our country. It is now, I think, the future. Thank you for your listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sirangelo. Professor Dumbacher.
Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Peters, Senator Nelson, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss my thoughts on leadership in space exploration. I believe reasserting leadership in space exploration involves the broader space exploration community, NASA, industry, emerging space companies, space research communities, the general public, and most importantly, future generations of explorers to whom we are all accountable. We live today on the shoulders of those that have taken us to the moon, extended our view into deep space, robotically explored the solar system and beyond, and developed the International Space Station. We owe it to the next generation to do for them that which our predecessors accomplished for us. We are at a crossroads where NASA is on the cusp of transition. Not just transition in the political sense, but a transition in exploration. The capabilities to again get humans beyond low Earth orbit, to the moon, Mars, and beyond are nearing completion in design and development. These capabilities will enable return of humans to the area around the moon, the human exploration of Mars and beyond, and the possibility of answering the three big science questions. NASA's 40-plus years of investment in low Earth orbit have blazed a trail that has opened up economic possibilities, rewritten science textbooks, not to mention all the applications that have spun off from this investment to make things better here on Earth. Space exploration requires long-term focus, commitment, and investment. Using the roles of government and commercial entities in the correct balance, technical risks are reduced, eventually opening up new markets in space for investment. Through space exploration, we gain new scientific knowledge for application on Earth, new technologies to further U.S. economic leadership, and develop innovative global markets. In addition, exploration serves to continually challenge human capabilities and feed human curiosity. In the past, major financial and programmatic disruptions to NASA's exploration activities have misspent taxpayer resources, confused the general public, demoralized a talented workforce, and diminished or wasted technical and economic capability. Also, I believe that improvement must be continuous, challenge the status quo, and enhance our capabilities for the future. My lessons learned in the 2009 to 2011 timeframe, as well as program planning and implementation challenges through 2014 are, why we continue to explore space can be better communicated. Number two, debates over specific destinations generate camps and an unhealthy environment of our plan versus their plan. Three, continuity of purpose and execution is essential for efficient use of resources and timely, tangible accomplishment. Budget stability and appropriate funding growth is critical to keeping exploration programs on schedule. We can address these lessons by, number one, a dedicated and transparent effort which works toward building and maintaining consensus on why we explore. This should build from the 2010 Authorization Act, which provides clear goals and objectives, the 2014 NRC Pathways to Exploration Report, and efforts such as the Pioneering Space Summit. We must combine this with an associated top-level strategy. This is a continual effort with the needed perspectives represented: NASA, industry, including emerging space companies, researchers, politicians, communications experts, cultural thinkers and writers, and the general public. Number two, focus on what needs to be accomplished and how to accomplish it in order to develop a sustainable strategy leading to a thriving space economy. Destinations are secondary to what should be accomplished. A sustainable strategy is well communicated, requires executable and affordable programs, and includes international partners on the critical path. Clear expectations and use of appropriate roles for government and private industry will support building a consensus strategy. Number three, continuity of purpose and execution is needed to avoid loss of momentum, massive replanning, and loss of talent. Space exploratory goals should be adjusted only based on what is discovered through progress and innovation. Number four, assure budget stability. Dr. Wernher von Braun once said, "Conquering the universe, one has to solve two problems, gravity and red tape." We could have mastered gravity. Budget stability results in efficient program implementation. Continuity across administrations and stable budget requests and appropriations will provide the strong foundation for building an executable consensus strategy that can be well communicated with all stakeholders. Stable budgets that allow for program planning over the budget horizon, including inflation to maintain purchasing power, are critical to continued progress. Stable budgets include minimizing the annual NASA budget debate as well as the national budget debate brinksmanship. Budgets should grow and be commensurate with the work required in any given year. In conclusion, I can attest through personal experience with students, researchers, and the general public that space exploration is relevant across the globe. Today, there are over 8,000 talented workers across all 50 states developing and building our space exploration elements. With so many on Earth eager to explore, it is imperative that we take lessons from the past, benefit from that knowledge, and fashion a space exploration strategy that is continuous, communicated, sustainable, and suitably funded. Thank you for your past and present support. Thank you for this opportunity to present my views. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Professor Dumbacher, and thank you to each of you for your learned testimony. Between 2005 and 2010, NASA spent roughly $13 billion on the Constellation program before it was canceled in 2011. The first question I'd like to ask the members of this panel is, what are the lessons we can learn from the cancellation of the Constellation program? And what steps should Congress take to ensure that the Space Launch System and Orion don't face the same fate in years to come? Mr. Gerstenmaier?
Again, I think we're at a very different posture this time with the current programs. Has been described earlier, the amount of hardware that's getting ready to go fly, the amount of development that's behind us. The teams have made tremendous progress in moving forward. We're essentially roughly 2 years away from launch of really the next generation of launch systems that allows us to go to deep space. We've made tremendous progress, and I think we need to all recognize that progress. We also need to recognize that it's difficult making that progress. Development is not easy. There will be problems discovered as we build this hardware. And we need to look that we're building a system and not just focused on a single launch or a single two launches. We're actually building a system for the future. And I think if we all collectively keep those things in mind, we'll see the long-term vision of what we need to go forward with, and we'll be not tempted to jump to the next shiny object or to make a change in direction as occurred in the past. So I think we need to look at these systems. They clearly are world-leading systems. Every nation around the world is determined they need a heavy lift launch vehicle. We are building a heavy lift launch vehicle. We are not designing, we are not talking about it. Its hardware is available to go be seen, touched in New Orleans. The capsule's in Florida, the hardware's there, our systems are there. We need to continue the course, stay where we're moving forward, and we'll continue to be a leader in space.
And let me ask you, what is the impact of SLS and Orion deep space capability? What does that mean for United States leadership in space?
We will be the only nation that has the ability to take crews beyond low Earth orbit to the vicinity of the moon on a regular basis with this system. And eventually, with the additional work we're starting on habitation systems, we can add those to Orion, and we can then essentially move human presence beyond the Earth-Moon system into the solar system. So we will be the only nation really going beyond low Earth orbit with humans moving into the solar system, as we've described through this methodical process, heading ultimately towards Mars.
And if a subsequent administration were to cancel SLS or Orion, as we did with the Constellation system, what would the consequences of that be?
Again, you've described the dire consequences that occurred when we canceled Constellation, and you described the impacts, which described the impacts of the auto industry and what occurred in this huge downturn. We've essentially recovered from all that. We're moving forward. Cancellation of Constellation and SLS would essentially put us back in that start all over again posture to begin again with all the negative consequences that you've described earlier as you talked to us before. And all those would be realized again. You know, that even the workforce that I work with, you know, it was a devastating blow to them when this work got pulled away from them, as you've described. I think people in our industry, as described by these panelists, maybe work for more than just the paycheck. There's a passion that sits below us. And when you cancel a program or you take something at your life work that you've really sacrificed, and you take that away for seemingly a trivial reason, that is very devastating to our workforce. And that can have huge implications to this nation, to our culture, to our psyche, and to our world leadership. And I don't think we should go through that again if we can avoid it.
Would anyone else care to amplify, Mr. Gold?
Senator Cruz, if I may, if we don't develop heavy lift, I assure you the Chinese will. They are working on it today, and they will use that system to deploy their new space station, which, by the way, will be introduced while our space station is being retired. So if we do not develop this critical capacity, we will be behind China, who is making, frankly, all of the right decisions. And I think what you need to do with SLS, and frankly with any of the space systems, is link it to the private sector. Make sure there's a connectivity there. Because I can't tell you who's going to be in charge of NASA 8-9 months from now, but I can tell you who's going to be in charge of Space Systems L'Oreal. And I think the private sector brings a stability, brings support to the space program that can allow these programs to move forward without interruption.
And what are the consequences to our national interest if we were to remain dependent on Russia for low Earth orbit and access?
Senator, I'll take that. In your opening statement, you talked about what we are spending outside the United States, and I think one element of the beyond low Earth orbit system that Bill Gerstenmaier talked about that isn't so much recognized is that by turning over low Earth orbit activities to the commercial sector, one of the things we have been able to do is enable NASA to look beyond low Earth orbit, take their resources, take their energy, take the ability that their people have, and look towards what else could we do, which is really most definitely a government sector operation. We've received that benefit by enabling companies like mine and others to start operating in low Earth orbit. At the same time, we're getting the dual benefit of being able to bring back home those dollars that would be spent outside in the United States. We're launching our astronauts and our services and our supplies from American soil with American spaceships on American rockets, and that's what we believe we should be doing.
But Senator, I think it's also important to ask the question, will we have an American station for Mr. Sirangelo's spacecraft to go to? That it's good that we're concerned about launching with the Russians right now, but unfortunately, we also have to worry about right now whether there will be a U.S. platform in orbit for them to go to. And as I mentioned in my testimony, we're already potentially behind schedule in trying to figure out what that transition will look like. The countries and companies that can operate in LEO will have the greatest impact, I think, economically. That's where our satellites are. That's where our commercial interests are. That's where our military interests are. So while we ask about getting people to LEO, I also ask not to forget about LEO utilization, what we're doing there, and what the competitive industry and markets look like in that environment.
Thank you very much. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again to our panelists. Actually, Mr. Gold, just want to pick up on a statement you made about the SLS rocket and having really public-private partnerships, having commercial investments in that as well. There are some folks who have argued that NASA probably shouldn't be leading that there might be commercial companies that will pick that up. I don't think that's what you were saying, but could you explain what you are implying by that statement? And certainly NASA on the right track as being the leader in developing this initial SLS rocket, or what are your thoughts?
So as Benjamin Franklin was trying to counsel us, Senator, and thank you for this question, because I think this is the conundrum that we all struggle with. You know, you heard every one of us talk about the industry trying to come together, that we all share this spark of inspiration that Mr. Sirangelo and Mr. Gerstenmaier mentions. I think what we need to do is the all of the above solution here, to stop dividing ourselves that there's only one way to get this done, there's only one solution. As I described in my testimony, we need to seek out those intersection points where the private sector and government interests are aligned and feed those. I don't see any problem in proceeding with the SLS system, which could potentially benefit the private sector with its capabilities. And if we do have a presence in cislunar or the moon or Mars, that's going to open up all kinds of opportunities for the private sector. You know, you could have a second commercial cargo program for bringing cargo out to cislunar locations or the moon or Mars. So I don't see a conflict here. I see the potential for great synergy and complementary activity.
Right.
Yeah, I would surely echo the same sentiment. I think by using the private sector, where they're, in some sense, they can be more nimble than we can on the government side. We need to go do that. We're seeing the innovation occur in both commercial cargo and commercial crew. That's very important for them coming online. We just put out a unique proposal to industry. It's called a request for information, where we essentially have one of the ports on board space station that we're going to make available to the private sector to go utilize how they want to go utilize it. So we asked them for ideas. We said, we'll provide power to you, we'll provide atmosphere to you, you can attach your module to station. So think of it as having a piece of land somewhere in some prime city, and we're saying that piece of land is available for you. You can build what you want there. You can use cargo transportation to get there. You can buy that on the private sector market. You can get crew transportation privately to this location. And we asked them for ideas of how they would use this port. So it'll be exciting to see what the private sector tells us in this response. How can they use this unique aspect? They could put their station there. They could operate for a while as a separate entity with a purely private sector demand to this research facility. And then at some point when the station's life is exceeded, it could undock from station and be the basis for the next private sector station. So we are actively working to bring the private sector along. It enables us to do these harder, more difficult things that I think are the right things to do for the government until there's a proven market, until there's demand shown. It's the right thing for the government to do those harder things that don't quite make sense to the private sector, but then as soon as we can, bring the private sector behind us so they can follow along with us and we can use them in a very effective manner to keep advancing into space. Because these challenges we described, they can't be done by one nation, they can't be done by one government entity. They have to be done with the best of all of us, and that includes the private sector as well as international partners.
Yeah, and I think as you make the statement about how we have to be together, both private sector, other nations coming together, it's not just technical, it's really financial. In fact, I think the Pathways to Exploration report from the National Academies noted that our biggest challenge is not technical to do these wonderful things that we want to do. It's really financial and how we have the wherewithal to fund these kinds of projects. And all of you are aware that funding for NASA has not kept pace with the trajectory that was envisioned in the 2010 authorization. And yet, given that, you still have been able to make significant progress with the SLS, Orion, and other related systems for deep space exploration as well. But I guess that leads to a question, and I'll ask Dr. Dittmar first. In your view, is NASA on a sustainable trajectory financially? Or quite simply put, can we fund a human mission to Mars on this course without sacrificing some other types of programs?
Those are two little bit different questions. Let me just put on my Human Spaceflight Committee hat, because as you know, I was on the NRC Pathways report. The first thing I would say is that what we found in the report is that where NASA is now, it is sustainable. It's developing these programs. It's eventually going to need to sort of say, okay, we're going to go do this, this, and this, but right now the focus is on developing those capabilities. And the budget that Congress has provided has allowed that progress to continue to be made. There is no question, however, that as you move forward and really begin to start rolling on this stuff, you probably are going to need an increase. One of the things that would really help would be for the funding to keep track with the rate of inflation. Because if it doesn't keep track of the rate of inflation, you're in effect, you're in a decreasing situation. Looks like flat funding, but it's really not, because your buying power actually decreases, right, over time. So maintaining the rate of inflation is the very first thing that needs to be addressed. Over time, you're definitely going to need modest increases. But another thing that we noted in the report, and this one gets lost a lot, so I want to just make the point, is that technology is increasing by leaps and bounds all around us, right? I mean, every week something new happens, things are changing. And one of the assumptions that we made, and it's one of the reasons we didn't tag a dollar figure on this, is that over time what would happen is technologies would improve to the point where NASA was able to incorporate some of those technologies and reduce costs as it goes forward. Also, there'll be relationships with international partners, where partners are basically bringing parts to that whole architecture. And we assume, as Mike was just talking about, that commercial enterprise will also sort of begin to sort of pick up some of the, as we're moving forward. So is it on a sustainable trajectory? Yes, for now it is on a sustainable trajectory, but in the out years you will need modest increases in funding.
That's to achieve the Mars mission. You would need modest increases under your estimation?
Well, it's very difficult to say, because some of this depends on where it is that you're going and what order you're going and what you decide to do there, right? If we're talking about just, we start here, we launch, we go to Mars, that's one funding profile. If we say that we're going to start here, we're going to go into cislunar space, we're going to take some time and figure out what it is that we need to know that we don't know that we need to know, which is part of what exploration is about. We'll need to be learning as we go, all right? That's a different funding profile. If you do what I refer to in the pathways is the go everywhere and do everything, okay, model, which was essentially a whole lot of steps on the way to Mars, that's yet another funding profile. That funding profile is going to be the most expensive, okay, but it's also going to be the least risky, because you'll have been learning at each step that you go. So there's not a single answer to your question. It's just, it depends on what choices get made at what point along the line. Do I think that you're in a place right now to be moving out on that program? Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Daines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for testifying here today. There's a lot of conversation about the future of space travel, as we've heard today, and this public-private commercial kind of partnerships. And I think this whole promise, frankly, for future high-tech job growth, coming from somebody who spent a lot of time in the high-tech sector. And I want to really direct my questions thinking about how do we inspire the next generation of engineers and so forth in the partnerships of building an upstream farm team, if you will. I heard a lot of conversation about STEM and STEAM. I'm the only chemical engineer on the Hill, so I hold down the caucus by myself, but a big proponent certainly of the sciences and engineering. My alma mater, by the way, Montana State University, they've got an eclipse ballooning project. They're guiding 60 student teams across 30 states to build and launch the hardware to send live video from the edge of space to NASA's website during next summer's total solar eclipse. What's great about that is students working on projects will have tangible results, something they can really see, which I think is very exciting. I'm going to start with Mr. Gold. You're a graduate of Billings Senior High of Bronx. I know you've had both a personal and familial connection to NASA and have helped bring their outreach activities to Montana, which I thank you for that. Could you elaborate on the HUNCH program? And for those who don't know what HUNCH is, it's High Schools United with NASA to create hardware. Tell me about that, and it really is getting into this. How do we inspire more technically trained students for the future here?
Thank you so much for that question, Senator. Hunch, in my opinion, is one of NASA's most important programs. Although, in the interest of full disclosure, my mother runs it, so I'm anything if not biased. Hunch is operated out of Billings, Montana, as you noted, and what it does is it partners NASA Johnson Space Center in Senator Cruz's great state of Texas and 5 other NASA facilities with schools in Montana and across the country for the purpose of inspiring students to pursue careers in science and engineering by linking them up with NASA to provide real-world products to the agency for their use. For example, the galley table that the astronauts are using on the ISS today was built by Hunch. The astronauts are eating off a table built by the students. And I can not overstate the impact that I think it would have on a student for them to be able to say that I worked on a piece of the International Space Station that astronauts are eating off of today. I think if something like that had been available when I was at Billings Senior High, I might have been a useful engineer instead of a useless lawyer. But not that lawyers are useless, granted.
I think it turned out okay.
Absolutely, turned out, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Mr. Gerstenmaier, in your testimony, you didn't talk a lot about engaging younger generations. I know you have a lot to say about that. Would you also elaborate experiences with this Hunch program and other programs to inspire this next generation of engineers and astronauts?
I think the Hunch program's unique in the fact it focuses on high school students. In the fact it also reaches out to more the vocational side of the high school students, so it's not necessarily the high engineering college students, but it's more the vocational side. So they actually get hands-on experience working with our engineers, manufacturing hardware like Mike described, the table on board station. They've built 150 crew transfer bags. So when you see the crew transfer bags going across the hatches, those were manufactured by high school students. It's also exciting to actually visit with the students and talk to them and hear their personal stories of where they weren't sure what they wanted to do with their careers, and now all of a sudden they're building hardware, they're in the trainers in Houston, working side by side with an astronaut, understanding how a transfer bag should be manufactured, how to put handholds on it, how it can be used in microgravity. All of a sudden, they've got a real purpose for what their career trajectory is and what they want to go do. So it's a tremendous program to get young folks excited, especially high school age. I would say another group that I just got a chance to meet with are young professionals. Those are college-age students. You know, sometimes we think of ourselves as the Apollo generation, where we were motivated by what occurred in Apollo. It's interesting talking to this college group of students. They see it as the space station generation. So they see space station and this international activity as an unbelievable motivating force for them and their careers and their chance that they get to work internationally and globally with people on this space station that's as large as a football field that was talked about. So I think sometimes we discount the benefit of what we're actually doing today or the preciousness of the activities we're doing, and we take them for granted and we don't see them in the context of where they are. But I think they are tremendously motivating to our students. If you look, when we do activities now, we do social media activities where we have tweet ups, where we have a bunch of college students come in and talk about our programs. They are probably more knowledgeable about our programs than the general population in general. So I think we have a tremendous ability and a tremendous responsibility to educate both the younger students all the way from grade school through high school all the way into college.
And if I could just add, Senator, if it wasn't for Bill Gerstenmaier, there wouldn't be a Hunch. It wouldn't be in Montana, and that's true of many of these educational programs. So thank you, Mr. Gerstenmaier.
Thank you, and I'm out of time, but I just conclude, I really appreciate also how we motivate and encourage students who may want to go to a 2-year vocational training. We need to be training a generation of folks who know how to make things work, and to celebrate 2-year institutions just like we do 4 years. That's an issue I think we need to elevate the 2 years to the 4 years in many ways of celebrating that for those who don't want to go for full 4-year education.
And I think that's, again, the real advantage. We get, the benefit is by celebrating diversity and bringing a large population, it's amazing what support we can get and what we can accomplish.
Yeah, thank you.
Senator, if I could maybe add to that. One other thing I think is important to what my colleagues have been talking about is that when you speak to the young people, not only do they want to go out and build something and hold it, as you said, and be able to touch it, they want to know that there's a future for this. They want to know that future is going to be longer than a year or 2 or 3 or 4, because if they're going to commit to going into these industries and doing what we want them to do, They need to see that that future for NASA and for this industry is one that's going to last for 10 or 20 years as they look forward to the next couple of generations. And I think in doing that, the continuity, taking the space program outside of what might be a year-to-year concept and putting it into a place where people can look at it and say there's going to be a long-term future is going to be one of the most motivating things we can do for our young people. And I'm not just talking about the rocket scientists of the world. We value the electrician who wires our spaceship as much. What we're really doing in many ways, at least in our business, is creating the infrastructure, the equivalent, the internet equivalent of creating an iPad or a laptop, and being able to say the next group of people coming through are going to create the apps in the industry behind that. And that's what we want to motivate them to. In doing that, I think we need to show them that there's going to be a long-term path for this, and that's going to create the inspiration. Many of them want to be entrepreneurs. Many of them don't just want to come out and go work for a company. They want to create their own company. And I think showing them that path and realizing that's what sparks that inspiration is quite important for us as well.
Thank you, Mr. Sirangelo. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been an excellent panel, and each of you have brought a lot to the table. For example, and you're talking about the future of commercial putting a module on the space station. Now, that begs the question, we certainly ought to expand the authorization for the space station. You know, it wasn't too many years ago that the authorization was only to 2016, the present year. We have it out to 2024, but there's a lot more that we can do on that platform. It ought to be extended, and I will predict that shortly in the next few years, if not immediately, you'll see an extension even on out to the end of the decade. That will give part of the certainty of what you all have been talking about. And the certainty of funding is certainly key. Now, what you said, Dr. Dittmar, is so important that we're going to develop all these technologies that we don't know about today, but in order to get to the goal of getting to Mars, we're going to have to develop them, sustaining life, and then bringing that life back. Mr. Gerstenmaier, it would take us under conventional technology 6 to 8 months to get there, and then because the planets would be out of alignment, you'd have to stay on the surface a long time, then to come back another 6 and 8 months. Now, under present technology, how are you going to sustain life that long? It's going to be very difficult. So what we need to do is to sprint to Mars, stay a week or two, come home. You got any thing in mind in the way of those new technologies?
Well, we're looking at electric propulsion, and specifically higher thrust electric propulsion. The Reasserting activity, which we're investigating, is one area we're looking at. We have the idea is to actually we're under a next step phase 1 activity and propulsion to take a look at that next generation of propulsion. And the idea is to actually run one of these Reasserting engines in a chamber on the ground for 100 hours to prove the technology, to understand that the system can actually operate for those kind of durations. And if that test is successful, I think that proves to a lot of skeptics out there that this technology is ready to then be fielded and move. Again, the high thrust electric propulsion makes sense at the greater than 100 kilowatt thrust levels. The smaller electric propulsion is fine for things like the asteroid redirect mission, but for the bigger missions, this potentially has a lot of benefit. But we're actually proving today, there's a group at Astro that's actually working on this technology. They're going through a series of gates that leads up to this ground test that I described. And when we see that, I think that will clear the way for this new technology. And that's one area that we're pursuing to try to get there faster, as you described.
And if I may, Senator, solar electric propulsion is another area of intersection between the private and public sector. SEP is the future for satellite systems, which is already arriving, and the European Space Agency is subsidizing SEP systems, not just for exploration, but for commercial pursuit of the satellite business. As you say, we should be leveraging the International Space Station And part of that could be a SEP demonstration on ISS.
Okay, now we're talking about different payloads here, because with solar propulsion, it's going to be, you could move a big mass very slow. I don't want to get bogged down in the details. We're talking about a sprint. But what Mr. Gerstenmaier said is we're testing one on the ground. Eventually, you're going to have to go to space. It's another reason we need the space station up there as a platform to do the testing. All right, let's talk. I want to get to you, Dr. Dumbacher, but let me ask Mr. Gerstenmaier first. Asteroid redirect. Now, I don't know why that has gotten some political commentary in it. You said something, I think, prophetic a while ago. You said what we did when Kennedy said we're going to the moon and back, and then leave it to the technicians, the engineers, and the scientists to decide how we're going to do it. All right? We said we're going to Mars. The president said that. You all came up with an asteroid redirect, and yet we've had political commentary that that's not the thing to do. You want to comment about that?
Yeah, when we looked at the asteroid redirect mission, we know we needed to look at electric propulsion to potentially position large cargo in the vicinity of Mars, because even with the advanced propulsion, it's still going to take a while to get to Mars. You're going to have to generate propellant on the surface of Mars to come back, but that's a very long journey. So we're going to have to carry supplies in some way. So we need electric propulsion to move large masses. The asteroid redirect mission does that. It builds electric propulsion. It builds off of communication buses that Mike is aware of to actually move those large masses. We move a large boulder to simulate effectively a cargo that we could be moving. We also bring that back to the vicinity of the moon, where we can then do activities with crews to interact with that large asteroid. We can remove samples with crews. We need to learn how to do spacewalks where there's not continuous communication with the crews like there is in low Earth orbit. We'll do that around the moon where there's periodic comm outages. The crews will have to be more autonomous. Those crew interactions remotely and being independent are direct actions that we need to understand when we go to Mars. So when we took all those capabilities and we looked at what we needed to go do, this asteroid redirect mission became a very excellent way to realistically demonstrate and learn the skills and develop the hardware, techniques, and capabilities will be needed for Mars. So that's the genesis of how the mission came up, and that's how it fits in the vision for Mars. We may not have done as good a job at the beginning explaining what we did. Maybe that's some of the problems, but I think we've crisped that discussion up. Our teams are moving forward. We're making good progress. We're understanding the benefits of this directly, and it has direct application to what we're trying to do in the Mars, the Journey to Mars activity we're pursuing.
May I impose on the chairman to have Professor Dumbacher comment?
Yes, Senator. I think the asteroid redirect mission is one of those things that is in the system. Back to my point that we need to figure out what needs to be accomplished and go accomplish it. And the list that Mr. Gerstenmaier just gave you, I think is an excellent list. I would add one thing to it, and that is we have to learn how to live and work in space further and further away from home. Right now, our astronauts are an hour and a half away, 2 hours away from getting home safely. When we go to the moon, in our past experience with Apollo, we were 3 days away. In the distant retrograde orbits and eventually working our way out to Mars, we're going to be 9 days away from home, and that sets a whole new standard for operations, how you handle abort scenarios, how do you handle the human life and maintaining human life in abort scenarios, as well as developing and designing hardware that has much better reliability than we have today. We have to have the ability to repair that hardware in place. We can't just call the guys up back on Earth and say, send me something up on the next ship, because we're further away from home and we have to learn how that changes the whole thought process, the whole mentality, and activities in the cislunar space gives us that experience base that we can build from to go on to Mars.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of the members who testified. Before we close, I want to ask for unanimous consent to insert the following letters into the hearing record: a letter from Virgin Galactic, a letter from the Planetary Society. Without objection, they'll be admitted to the record.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask one more question? I didn't know you were ready to adjourn.
Sure.
I thought we were going back through another round, and so I'll just cut it real short. I want to ask Mr. Gerstenmaier if he could tell us what have we learned from 2 failures of the crew resupply.
Yeah, from
Not crew, cargo,
cargo,
resupply.
yes.
I meant cargo resupply.
Again, I think when we set up the cargo resupply program, it's important to recognize we set it up and we recognized we could take more risk with our cargo than we could with crew flights. So it was purposely designed where NASA protected really the space station to make sure these vehicles could not damage the space station. But we essentially let the private sector manage the launch requirements, manage the launch reliability, manage the launch safety. So this was a chance for us to see what industry could really do with minimal NASA involvement. And we recognize we might have some failures, but that would not be a problem to us overall because we had a robust planning and we had enough cargo flights and enough diversity that we could keep stations supplied, so we could tolerate a failure. I think what we learned is that the private sector can recover from these failures fairly quickly. You know, we didn't have to stand down for an extended period of time for 2 years to go do an investigation, to write a big report. They understood what a failure occurred. They were very motivated to get back flying again. In the case of the orbital ATK vehicle, they knew they were going to have to redesign their launch vehicle. So they went out to the market and they found another launch vehicle to go launch on. They found the Atlas V that was available to go launch on to keep their cargo vehicles flying. And so they were able to fly 2 flights on the Atlas V vehicles and keep station resupplied. So that showed the innovation that they could take a spacecraft that was designed to fly on one rocket, move it to a different rocket, and still supply station with really no NASA involvement. They did that on their own. They did that based on their own knowledge, and that shows the resilience of the private sector to recover from those failures. In the case of SpaceX, again, they turned around very quickly. They understood what the problem was. Within a matter of days, they were actually in a test facility on the ground testing the failure that they thought had occurred on orbit to verify that that failure occurred. That getting into test was much faster than I could have ever done on the NASA side. By the time I would have had the ability to get contracts written and done their proposals and put the test sequence in place, it would have been a half a year. They did that in 2 days. They were very quick getting back. They involved us in that. We got to see the activity, and again, they returned to flight. So I think we provided them some comments on ways they can get better, some things they can think about from a systems engineering standpoint. But I think what we really learned is the private sector, if we give them the right incentives and we have the contracting structure set up, they can deliver the capabilities that we NASA need in a very effective manner.
Senator Peters wanted to give a brief closing statement.
Right, thank you. I just want to say that because of time constraints, we have many questions. I'll look forward to having an opportunity to following up with each of you. And thank you so much for your testimony. I just wanted to leave with one thought, Mr. Gerstenmaier. You mentioned about the space station generation. I'm part of that Apollo generation with all of you, but I had an opportunity to see this firsthand, which is why it's so important that we continue to focus on this with NASA, is one of the programs you had with a high school in Michigan where the students all came in at a big assembly and had an opportunity to talk directly to the astronauts on the space station as they were floating in the station. And I was up on stage looking out at the audience, and the look on the faces of those young people, how excited they were. They were asking fabulous questions, and then after the program was over, I asked them, how many of you would like to go into engineering or science? And the whole auditorium raised their hand. So it is an incredibly powerful thing. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for all of you and inspiring our next generation to be great scientists and explorers.
Well, thank you very much. And I will say, if we truly want to inspire a nation, we could have a program to launch Congress into space. But that may be a more ambitious endeavor. And the nice thing is it'd only be a one-way trip. With that, I want to thank all the witnesses for being here, for your learned testimony. And the hearing record is going to remain open for 2 weeks. During that time, senators are asked to submit any questions for the record. Upon receipt, the witnesses are requested to submit their written answers to the committee as soon as possible. And with that, I want to thank you again for being here, and this hearing is now adjourned.